No, you didn't copy down stem cells. That was yesterday's note. I did ask you to read the section. I don't know if I gave you the whole pages for the section, but I asked you to make notes on specialized cells. All right. Now I'm going to assign that at the end anyway. So if you're done those notes on specialized cell, awesome, you're done. If you're not, you can do it for homework or you can do it at the end of class. It's not like I'm collecting it or anything. So no, we have not wrote this note down. Okay, stem cells. And you don't have to rewrite stem cells. Obviously, you put that as the title. You can put it underneath there. Now it says there are cells in animals that can differentiate into many different cell types. Would plants have stem cells? I really don't know. I think they would have to, because if you start with something like a seed that has particular cells in it, and in the end you end up with a complex plant that has, again, different types of cells for different functions, then at some point in time, those beginning cells have to somehow differentiate into specific functional cells. So again, I don't know for certain. I've never studied this particular topic. In this note it says, are cells in animals? But I would think plants could have stem cells as well. We all start as, a fertilized egg, which then, results in 2 cells and then 4 cells, and then at some point in time, we end up being a complex human being with all kinds of different cells, skin cells, and muscle cells, and nerve cells, and therefore, somehow, those beginning cells must, at some point in time, differentiate their function and somehow turn into functional cells that do particular different things within our body. And these starting cells, these cells that have the ability to just kind of be a generic cell at the beginning and ultimately turn into a specific functioning cell is what we call a stem cell, all right? So it is what we say an undifferentiated cell. Differentiated simply means that we can break it into its different functions that it may potentially become, all right? So if it's undifferentiated, it means it doesn't have a job yet, but at some point in time, after so many divisions, it will get a job of some sort, okay? All right. This is just a little note that kind of explains this logic. Even though you're not necessarily going to draw this picture, you can write down the fact that these cells in the embryo have not specialized yet. You can still write that just as a statement underneath. So the logic then is at some point in time, in terms of the mitosis and the division, these cells then take on specific structures. It's now believed by biologists that, these cells contain the same genetic information as all the other cells in the body, the skin cells and the muscle cells and all that type of stuff. But it's believed by biologists at this point in time that something at some point in time can turn on and turn off certain genes, all right? So genes, I think, are the term we use to describe how the cell results in kind of expressing certain traits, like your hair color or you know, your eye color and all that particular type of stuff. And that's encoded on the DNA, which is that strand that's in the nucleus. And so it's now believed that certain conditions can turn on a portion, in other words, activate a gene, so that that cell then becomes a skin cell, or that cell then becomes a muscle cell. So they're like little switches, they almost describe it as, that when they get into a specific situation, a switch is activated. It's not really a switch. It would be a biochemical something. Some molecule is introduced into the cell that then activates a certain part of the gene that then makes it become specialized and gives it a job. All right? Okay. There, that states that down at the bottom there. Again, kind of extending this idea at the bottom on like the DNA, certain parts of it being turned on to cause the cell to then gain traits of a skin cell or a bone cell or muscle cell, et cetera, et cetera. For a long time, it was believed that if there were identical twins, and identical twins are formed when that zygote splits into two identical cells, and then those two identical cells produce identical offspring, it was believed that those identical twins, at any point in their lifetime, if you sampled a cell and you checked their DNA, that it should be identical. And again, this was just the other day, I heard it on a little science thing on the radio. It's now been tested that when you take cells from identical twins at various points in their life, that they actually can find a genetic difference between them. That genetic difference kind of grows with time, and that there's also environmental conditions that can activate genes. So not just necessarily the fact that, you know, that it is your body and that differentiating cell turns into a particular skin cell, but if you were exposed to different environmental conditions, maybe by living in different locations on the surface of the earth, or perhaps stress conditions, you know, one twin being stressed more versus the other one, maybe, you know, for whatever reason the stress would be, that can also cause minor genetic variation. So, you know, what does that have to do with this discussion? That that yes, genes can be activated and turned on to give specific jobs, but then the environment around you also can affect that activation of the genes and therefore result in slightly different expressions of those genes. When I say expressions, I don't mean like a facial expression, but I mean perhaps a slightly different skin type, one person being maybe mildly more sensitive to chemicals versus the other person, et cetera, even if they were identical twins, right? A few years back, I remember, some show, maybe like CSI or Criminal Minds, where there were identical twins and who caused the, who resulted in the murder, who did the murder, and of course it was twins, and they got off because they, that type of thing. Now it's believed that if given enough time and that genetic variation for different things, they actually now can genetically determine the difference even between identical twins, because there would be that minor genetic variation due to the environment affecting their cells slightly different than their twin cell, which is, yeah, but when they get a little older, they're going to move away from each other, likely, I would think. Don't you think? But just because they're in the same household doesn't necessarily mean they're under identical environmental conditions. Now, I'm not qualified to debate this, because this is just hearsay from what I hear on the radio and that type of thing. But internal stress is one of the things that they quoted, right? So if someone's very under a lot of stress for whatever reason, let's say one of the twins participates in a sport where the other one doesn't, maybe that's a rare situation, but it could be, and then that one particular twin's coach is very demanding and causes some stress on that particular child versus the other one, that they predict, right, that might be enough to cause a minor genetic variant in some way, right? So it wouldn't, they're implying it doesn't take much to cause that genetic variation. Are you okay? You buying what I'm selling you? I'm not necessarily selling it to you, because again, I'm just going from what I've read, but I understand what you're saying as well. Yeah. I guess it could be. I guess it could be possible. Again, I don't have any numbers or anything to support this, right? So maybe it's even more possible that they're more similar than dissimilar. The only thing that I read is that they've measured a minor genetic variant between identical twins. I didn't get enough information to know whether most of them were still the same and just a few of them weren't, or most of them weren't the same and they found one that was. I don't have any numbers to back that up. Right, I don't have any supporting evidence for you. Okay, so types of stem cells. Embryonic stem cells. So where do we find stem cells? Well, in the embryo, obviously. Now, embryonic stem cells are a little controversial in that biologists believe that stem cells can be used to treat certain types of ailments. A big one was like a spinal cord injury, right? Because nerve cells, we learned in that other video, don't divide. So if you have nerve damage in the spine and it results in maybe a paraplegic situation, some scientists believe that if you inject that area with stem cells, you're supplying the area with new undifferentiated cells. Putting them in that environment might cause the stem cells genes to be activated and turn them into nerve cells, thus connecting that that gap in the broken spine, and thus resulting in being able to use your legs again. And in the beginning of stem cell studies, it was believed that the embryo was the only source of stem cells. So in theory, what could you do? Well, you could take an egg and a sperm, and you could create an embryo, and then you could harvest those stem cells to maybe cure an ailment in the parent. But obviously, there's huge ethical situations with that, because that embryo, once it's fertilized, right? Many people believe that that's life, and you can't just tear that apart and use the stem cells. So embryonic stem cells are very, very controversial. And this was about maybe 7, 8 years ago, where in the United States they said there will not be any embryonic stem cell research. We will not allow it because every time they tear apart a human embryo, you technically potentially are destroying a human life, right? That's if your beliefs follow that particular belief line. So very, very controversial. Since then, biologists have discovered that there are other parts within our bodies that produce stem cells, and they're now working on techniques to kind of harvest those cells from our own bodies if we were to need them, and then place them into other places in our bodies that need new repaired cells. So the debate on embryonic stem cells has declined greatly because these techniques are starting to come into play. The video that I have is an older video around 2005. It does talk about the debate of embryonic stem cells. Not a bad video. Who's kidding who? I'm trying to fill in some time on a Friday as well with the video. But it does have that debate. But to be honest, the debate has kind of declined because they found other sources within our bodies that produce these stem cells. Okay, so obviously the embryo is an important place. Tissue stem cells, also called adult stem cells. So like I said, they found that within our bodies there are cells that have this ability to also differentiate. Now I have not heard of anyone that has been that has brought their function of their legs back by using these stem cells. I don't know of any examples of that. So I don't know how great they are at doing it, but that's the idea of it. Yep. There you go. And these were your own cells. So they took some marrow from your blood, and then they placed it in your... Yep. Yep. Okay, to form what, cartilage or something like that? Yeah, that's a big word. I don't know all that stuff. I'm supposed to teach it to you later on, but I have no idea what that is. What's a condyle?
It's like the outer layer close to the cartilage, like on the bone.
All right, when we talk about the musculoskeletal system in January, you will tell us that again, and then it might make more sense to me. But that's perfect. We'll save that for later, all right? Because we'll talk about cartilage and other stuff, but not a condyle, and you'll be able to tell us that. Perfect. What's that? We're going to hold that thought for a bit. That's right. So yeah, well, there you go. It works. Well, not in all situations, but it worked in that situation. That's good. And you've gone back and you can use that knee and it works awesome. That's cool stuff. We've got living proof here. That's exciting. Okay, so found in specialized tissues, bone marrow can only develop into certain types of cells. So there's obviously some limits there. And obviously it can turn into some kind of musculoskeletal cells because Marissa's living proof of that. That's exciting. All right, let's keep going. So stem cell transplants, we'll bring the whole thing up. And really my note, probably about, I haven't used it in 2 years, and the book is probably 2 or 3 years old. There's probably more news on this front. Right? Is it my responsibility to track it down? Probably, but I don't usually. But I'm sure if you did a Google search on stem cell transplants, you'd find all kinds of information. You'd probably find some good information, some bad information, just like any Google search you do. So bone marrow has been used for quite some time as a treatment for leukemia. If you have compatible cells, you've got to find a compatible donor. But another source of stem cells is banked cord blood. If, when you were born, your parents had the doctor take some blood from the umbilical cord and keep that, perhaps storing it cryogenically. That's probably the way they're doing it, some kind of a freezing technique that preserves the cellular structure but kind of holds it in a, in a frozen state, be like freezing eggs for in vitro fertilization. It's believed, and I believe they've used it, that if you were to then suffer from something that needs stem cells, you could use that banked cord blood, which has stem cells in it, to treat various situations. In this case, obviously, it's linked to leukemia. I wouldn't know of any other beyond that. But some people have done that. My sister did that with her last child. They took some of that blood and they banked that, and if that child ever needs stem cells, they have that, right? There's obviously a fee for some company to maintain those proper conditions to keep the cells viable. So there must be a fee involved in it, but you could do it. Nothing. It's not the writers I'm giggling at, it's the sleepers. Jillian's now struggling with hair, covering her face. I'm making it as exciting as I possibly know how.
No, it's not.
Oh. You were gaming all night? You're a gamer, are you?
No, I'm just on the phone.
Right, gaming. I'm going to assume you were gaming all night. Oh, goodness, hold on. The research is also being done. Don't worry about this. Research is also being done using stem cells to treat diseases such as Parkinson, which is a brain disorder. But that's not a big deal. Okay. Now, excellent. What am I doing here? What's my next slide? We're not doing that. And then there's the review. Okay, so don't have to write this down. This is what I asked you to do yesterday. I asked you to, out of the book, I asked you to copy into your note the functions of those specialized cells. If you're done it, excellent, you're done. There's the textbook section on stem cells. I don't know if I officially, did I officially kind of say read through that section? So if you've read through the section, excellent, you're done there. You've got the textbook information. So if you've done those two things, awesome, you're done. If you're not, I'll come back to this in a moment. You can write it down, and as we're watching the video, you can do it. I really don't care. The video's not pivotal here. Now, we're not going to look at these cells quite yet. We might look at these cells and take some pictures of specialized cells like muscle cells and that. We'll do that after the test on the Thursday. There is the review questions out of the textbook in preparation for the test. And I'm actually going to stop recording at this point. because then once the recording is all taken